call the Treasurer.
Exactly a week from now, Jim Chalmers will get to his feet and deliver his fifth budget.
It will be a really responsible budget.
Shaped by the storm of an unpredictable war.
The Australian economy is getting absolutely pummeled by this war in the Middle East, and Australians are paying the price for that.
And an unwelcome inflation breakout that has resulted in yet more bad news for struggling households, with the third interest rate increase this year.
Just because this was the decision that was widely expected and broadly anticipated won't make it any easier for millions of Australians with a mortgage.
Today's Reserve Bank rate hike reverses all three of last year's reductions and returns the cash rate to its post-pandemic high.
Inflation in Australia was already too high before the recent conflict in the Middle East began. The most recent data have confirmed that some of the increase in inflation was being generated by economy-wide capacity pressures.
The Reserve Bank's harsh medicine will embolden the government's critics, who say it must do more to alleviate inflationary pressures in the economy. And the Governor today warned against the political temptation for handouts, even if dressed up as worthy cost of living relief.
The extent to which government make up the shortfalls for households by giving them more money, it makes it harder to dampen demand.
Our inflation rate is higher than any other developed country in the world, higher than everybody else's. This is a complete failure of a government which has overseen a situation where the price of everything is rising.
To those people who are pretending that the government's budget is the sole driver of prices in our economy or interest rate decisions, they weren't saying that last year when interest rates were cut 3 times.
The Treasurer insisted that next week's budget will bank any revenue windfalls and save more than is spent on new measures.
We intend to play a helpful role, not a harmful role, in the fight against inflation.
The bottom line, though, on all of this is this shock it's a real income shock for Australia and the world. We are poorer and there is no way out of that. The trade-off is much worse.
All of which has raised the political stakes. Expectations are growing that the government is preparing to break promises at last year's election by targeting tax breaks on property investors and trusts.
Don't waste a good crisis. We desperately need tax reform, and the government has a substantive majority. So now is the moment to do it. They have the political capital to lose and the crisis to justify it.
The shape of next week's budget is becoming more apparent. The government will claim tens of billions of dollars in spending cuts, particularly from the runaway NDIS. It has confirmed modest tweaks to an electric vehicle leasing subsidy, and it has dropped plenty of hints that it will curb capital gains tax discounts and negative gearing. And there was a report today that it's about to give every working taxpayer a one-off $300 cash handout.
There's a whole lot of speculation out there in budgets, and that's what happens. Some of it right, some of it's wrong.
What's not in doubt is that the potential hit on older, wealthier and tax-optimised Australians would be framed as a way to address intergenerational fairness. A bold political bet, given some of the mooted reforms could affect millions of taxpayers, that older voters will be in a forgiving mood.
When they run out of their money, they come after yours. That's the reality of what we are seeing right now from this Prime Minister. He either lied before the election knowing that he always intended to raise these taxes, or he's completely incompetent and realised he'd run out of money.
Whatever the government decides, it looks like a political fight is inevitable, which raises a question. If you're about to anger some voters, no matter what you're about to do, is there an argument to go big rather than play it safe?
There's going to be fewer kind of taxpayers moving forward who are going to be shouldering the load of the expenses of a much older population. And so if we don't enact some of these hard rip-off-the-Band-Aid reforms that help to make our tax system more sustainable, it's going to be a heavy load for people my age and younger moving forward.
Tim Wilson is the Shadow Treasurer. Tim Wilson, welcome to 7:30.
Thank you for having me.
In announcing the rates decision today, the Reserve Bank governor said that any further cost of living relief will make it harder to control inflation in Australia. But she also said that current conditions are hurting poorest households the most. In these conditions, and conditions that are likely to get worse during the course of this year, do you accept that the government has some responsibility to protect those people?
Well, I accept that the government is responsible for the cause of the inflation that we're currently experiencing, which is punishing people on low incomes. The challenge now for the government, because they wouldn't take inflation seriously up until this point, is they're left exposed with very few choices available to them. They can either hand out more public money and engage in spending, which risks stoking inflation, as the Reserve Bank governor outlined very clearly in her press conference today, but it will only continue to give with one hand and take with the other. That's why it was important to take it seriously, inflation seriously, last year, but unfortunately the Treasurer turned a blind eye, made the outrageous boast that we'd turned the inflation interest rate corner, and it was misinformation then, and Australians are living with the consequences now.
But what would you do in this current scenario? Would you refuse point blank any cost of living relief for the lowest income households in Australia, no matter how bad this crisis gets in the Middle East?
Well, we started this crisis by saying that we would provide a cut to the fuel excise on the condition there was inflation offsets. The government has gone on and cut fuel excise, but not provided inflation offsets. So we'll be looking very clearly at the inflation offsets the government offers, but not ones they say, ones they deliver. The Federal Treasurer, for instance, likes to point to the $114 billion he claims he's created in savings, but in the next breath he's actually gone on to spend an additional $223 billion over the life of this government. What we need is actual cuts to spending to stop pouring debt petrol on the inflation fire, to ease the inflation pressure that Australians are living right now.
Let's go to one of the specifics. There are reports, at least, this is not a specific in the budget yet, but there are reports today that the government will introduce a cost of living measure in the form of a $200 to $300, as far as we know, what's called an earned income offset for wage earners. Do you support that?
Well, it's a leak that's come out of the government's budget bunker at this point. Whether it was deliberate or malicious, we don't know. I'll wait and see what's confirmed before we decide whether we're going to support or oppose it. I'm mindful, of course, like everybody else, of the impact this inflation is going to have on Australian households. But unfortunately, when the government hasn't taken inflation seriously, we've ended up in this situation. And the risk is that if you keep handing out money to households, what you'll actually do is fuel the inflation further. You'll give with one hand, but then you'll take with the other, not just through the debt that's being incurred, but then, of course, the interest rates and the inflation pressure itself.
Let's have a discussion about anticipated changes to negative gearing and capital gains tax. Will you take to the next election plans to reverse any changes the government makes to capital gains and negative gearing?
Well, I mean, Sarah, the government hasn't even announced that they're going to introduce taxes, and you're asking whether I'm going to repeal them. Let's be serious.
You would have to accept at this point that we do anticipate something coming on negative gearing and capital gains tax. It is true that we don't have the detail. I just want to be clear on those two taxes. Will the Liberal Party put together a policy to reverse those changes before the next election? Seems like a fair question to me.
Well, until we actually have the proposals that the government's putting forward, I don't think it's a fair question to ask whether we're going to repeal them. What we do know is in the lead up to the last election, the Prime Minister consistently ruled out these family savings taxes on homes, on rental properties, and of course on trusts. And we've heard the Treasurer say only yesterday that we have to break trust to build trust so that they can target trusts. I think we need to be realistic. We'll wait and see what the proposals are, and then we'll consider the pathway forward. But my intention going to the next election is not to develop a policy program in response to Labor, My intention in the lead up to the next election is to develop an economic program that builds the future prosperity, growth and opportunity for the next generation of Australians. Labor's plan around intergenerational issues is to start to feed resentment and redistribution. Ours will be focused on growth and opportunity.
Well, the government has been circulating some quotes of yours. Of course, we don't rely on their circulated notes, but let me just put this quote to you from 2018. I'm not relying on it, I'm asking you to comment on it. You said, they say, the tax system is screwing young Australians. Do you still think that the tax system is screwing young Australians, much in the way that the Grattan Institute does, by putting too much of a burden on taxpayers and not enough of a burden on asset holders?
Well, so far, the biggest tax that young Australians who have their physical and intellectual labour to sell is income taxes. Income taxes, and so the government at this point has not flagged in any way, shape, or form any pathway to reduce income taxes in this budget. Of course, I believe in reducing income taxes. I've always believed in that, and will always work towards doing that.
Yes, but Tim Wilson, that quote, as you understand, that quote that I read out to you was you talking about the way tax operates in Australia. Do you still believe, as you said in 2018, that the system is screwing young Australians? Yes or no? That's a yes or no.
I just said yes. I believe that I've always believed that income taxes are too high at 47%.
No, that's not
the top marginal tax rate.
I'm just going to join you there, because what you were talking about at that time, it was a discussion about the relationship between income tax, the rate of income tax, and the way tax is levied on assets. And you said Australians need to demand a fairer tax system. I just want to know, yes or no, whether or not you think that the tax treatment of capital gains and negative gearing should change.
Well, I will only consider tax changes as part of a mix, and whether it actually advances the best pathway to grow the Australian economy. At the moment, the only pathway that's being put forward by this government is how they increase taxes and try and discourage people to work, people to invest in the future of Australia. And it won't, as the chief economist at the Commonwealth Bank of Australia has acknowledged, won't do anything for productivity, won't do anything for increasing the volume of homes. According to Jim Chalmers, in an interview a couple of years ago with this very program, said exactly the same thing. So he's had a change of heart, just like the Prime Minister has broken his word to the Australian community, where he's gone into fits of rage when people have asked him questions before the last election about whether he was going to change taxes on homes, taxes on rentals and taxes on trusts, and denied it flat and outright. And that's simply come up short.
Let me just ask you a quick question about the by-election coming up this weekend in Farrer. It looks like the Liberal Party is going to lose to the One Nation candidate who previously tried to be a Labor candidate, go figure. Is this the absolute nadir for the Liberal Party to lose to someone with that track record?
I don't think so. I mean, I think there's
You think there's a bigger nadir to come?
Well, that's cute, but I think there is a frustration with Canberra right now. There's no pretending otherwise. When people are living with the pressure of inflation from this government, they're looking at it and saying this government isn't advancing my interests. And of course, the Prime Minister didn't even have the courage to send a candidate and show up. And so, yes, we do have an Orange candidate who donated to the Teals, who wanted to be a Labor candidate, I think applied to be a Labor Party member. It's not really clear what he is or what he stands for. He wanted high migration, then by the end of this week he wanted lower migration. It's clear that there's a lot of message in this by-election, but I won't prejudge its result.
And yet that guy you just described is the one that's going to beat your candidate. Anyway, we'll wait and see what happens. That's what the polls are saying. But in the meantime, on this important day with a new decision, Tim Wilson, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.